So I've been working in interaction design for the past decade, and most of all with user experience design projects, interfaces, basically everything that bridges digital experience with human condition and making digital devices and products being more comfortable for use of human beings. So if you Google my name, you'll probably find out like those two watches, the most well-recognized projects. However, I've also been developing games since high school. And I would say last 3 years, I started to focus on games more. And those are last 3 titles that I have released. One of them is in an app store, is Shapest, it's a puzzle game. They're all pretty much around puzzle games. However, I'm really interested in researching game design in general as an interaction designer, because there are a lot of cross-pollination happening between UX, UI, and gamification, for example. Right? And very often, I meet people who never played video games, which is a surprise for me, but I keep meeting them. They know a lot about design, they know a lot about pop culture. Of course, they do everything that a usual person would do, but for some reason, they don't play video games. For me, as a person with a gamer background, like I grew up with consoles like Sega and Super Nintendo, it often comes as a surprise. And when I tell them what I do, they often ask me, oh, so you also do video games, so what should I play? If it's not your game, like what games would you recommend? And I'm often puzzled with this question. What video game to recommend to a person who never played video games? Initial temptation is to recommend them something from the childhood, something that I'm very familiar and that bonds to my memories of happy playthroughs and basically childhood memories. But that wouldn't be relevant for that person. So after usually cracking my brain for some time, I decided to give them Thomas Was Alone as the most recommended game. So every time someone asks me, I would recommend them to play Thomas Was Alone. And it's been like that for the last 5 years since the game was released. And there is a part of the reason, of course, is that I love the game myself. But I also approach this recommendation strongly professional as a designer. I think what an average person, without me knowing much of their background, or without me wanting to, let's say, adhere to their background and recommending something very specific, if I want to recommend an epitome for a video game, why would it be a Thomas Was Alone? And I listed down a couple of reasons for myself. So first of all, this is the game with very simple mechanics that are easy to pick up, and yet those mechanics, they don't treat a user as a stupid player, but they treat them as a smart person who can learn on top of them and start experimenting. So the game inspires creativity. Another reason is that this game uses the medium as a vessel for storytelling. It has extremely deep characters, and yet they're represented on the screen as very flat and small graphical pieces. So basically, if you haven't played Thomas Was Alone, it's the game where you control a pixel or like a colorful square. But it has extremely depth of personality and the story you uncover. And it's a good demonstration what Medium is capable of. Another reason, and it ties well with the storytelling, it's the game has a self-sufficient design. It's timeless. It does not try to adhere to modern brands, to modern trends. It does not try to chase the polygon count or make a horse look very realistic, or birds poop on you when you play the game. It focuses on what is important for the player, and this game will stay beautiful, relevant, and could be an interesting design exploration for students, for example, to learn decades to come from now. And finally, it is an extremely joyful experience to play, almost empowering. It is the game that makes you smile, it makes you happy when you play it. Let's say if you're depressed or sad, you play Thomas Was Alone, and most likely you'll get happier a little bit. And it goes to the extent that even if your colleague or your girlfriend, boyfriend, someone else is playing and you're just absorbing them, it is so emotionally positive that it is even just fun to watch. Right? So I was asking myself, why same set of rules, why same list I cannot apply to, let's say, other games? Why are there seem like they would be enjoyed by robots? That robot would be only focused on performing tasks or competing a goal. But that list that I appreciate as a human being will probably be missing there. And the reason is games right now, video games, are made out of a tool set that is in a bubble, and they're made in a vacuum. That is my understanding of a situation from user experience design point of view. When I'm talking about a vacuum here, what I mean is, of course, ignorance to a certain extent. And we're all in game industry, is very hard to see outside. So I want to give you an example of development in a vacuum outside from game development world. So the small device that's flying into space is Nokia N97. This is 2009, 3 years after iPhone, right? And this is a very good example of Nokia being in a vacuum and using bubble set of tools for 3 years, right? Non-capacitive touchscreen, Symbian OS. So where is the vacuum here? The vacuum is that everyone loved N97. It was extremely good phone. It beat iPhone in sales, and everyone loved it. No one wanted better. They wanted new Nokia phone, and that was true inside of Nokia. This was not true for consumer. It did not beat iPhone. No one liked it. Next year after this, the CEO of Nokia said using Android is like peeing in your pants to keep yourself warm in winter, and that's what Finnish boys do sometimes. And I think in the year after that, Nokia was peeing in its own pants, right? So this is a very, very clear example. What happens is when you don't look outside and you don't listen to your consumer, or you don't think what they might need really, because your product still sells. In case of games, we have a little bit of a more complex situation. And the problem is, it's not one company that has been in a vacuum and competition kind of opens its eyes to the reality. It's the whole industry is being a little bit in a vacuum. And our vacuum has 3 layers. And the first layer is the human condition. That is the umbrella. We're making games for humans. No one else plays our games. Sometimes cats play our games on iPads, but this is very rare. Right? And yet we're kind of orbiting that human condition on a spaceship with a distance. And this is the game industry. But it's not the game industry, it's the video games. So while games kind of are all happening on the planet, video games is a medium that initially arise from technical limitations. Like we have to have a screen, for example. That's how we perceive a video game right now. That's why we don't look at sport games so much. We don't look so much into games that have physical engagement, even though we have Wii U, which is a great example of financial success. We kind of think of it as like a small entity within itself, and that's why we base all our design hypotheses when we make a new game on the previous game we have experienced. And we are also in a bubble here. So the game creators, they live inside of a bubble of the spaceship of game industry. And I think this picture has something wrong with it, right? First, when you're so far from the distance of your actual market you're supposed to address, which are human beings, you start to get delusional. I had this wonderful conversation just 2 days ago, that nice addition to my talk, I hope. This was a gentleman from a very big game development studio, and he told me that because his studio has a male dominance in his team, designing female characters as sexually objectified is totally normal, because his games are not representing reality. They're representing something else. Sure enough, but human beings there are still perceived as human beings. So this is absolutely delusional, right? Another thing is, and this is just a good example, I think, but what we should think of is when we look from such a big distance, when we distance ourselves, because we have the spaceship and the spacesuit, we look at this planet and we start analyzing its species in a very strange manner. So we're not really informed what our users need. We very well know how to design drugs for them right now. We know how to design things that will cause addiction. We know that For example, how to design a game in a way that will cause retention growth. We never think that our users sometimes die when life expectancy ends, and that every time the user comes back to our game, they spend this resource more and more. And you can convert that resource into money as well. You can think that if your player plays your game, let's say 15 minutes a day in the morning and 15 minutes at night, he would play your game 15 hours in a month. And this is just one casual game. Now, let's imagine he also sleeps. So if you add 15 hours to 9, you'll get a full day. So you either can convert it as a full day of work, or you can think of it as a day off spent with family and so on. You take that day off when you design a game that does not give a meaningful reward to the player. And I don't think stars are a meaningful reward, right? I don't think that's what you get when you have a day off, right? You wouldn't exchange it for a couple virtual stars. But when you segregate it in small pieces, you don't feel it. And as a game designers, we don't think about it. We think as more of a metrics is that we're interested in performance. I think even if we're interested in performance, this is a huge resource you can utilize. You can use that time that people sacrifice in your game and make it, instead of a sacrifice, into investment, so they create more content for themselves and for you as well. So that could be one approach, right? I want to talk a little bit about why we are in a vacuum and why we are interested in one thing and not interested in another when making video games. In neuroscience, as well as in philosophy, there is a notion called qualia. And qualia is something that your brain or your consciousness basically gains every time you consciously experience something new. Let's say a first kiss, or absorbing a Grand Canyon is a qualia if you understand what just happened, right? If you think, oh, okay, this is something that I've never seen before, this is huge and vast and beautiful, and this is how you accumulate qualia. Qualias form a huge influence on further personal development. It forms your consciousness, and brain really likes those. That's why people love to travel and experience new things. But it also forms logical structures or certain expectations. And of course, we have, every industry have different problems and different reasonings for being in a vacuum. But I think for game industry, a very particular problem is that we all played games before making them. And certain things we saw in those games that were there because of technical limitations, because Medium was very young, they were qualias for us. We were really happy with explosions maybe in the game, and we think, oh, this is really good. We should make more games with explosions, because that makes me exciting. Where the reality is, well, yeah, sure, explosions are exciting, but that's not the Medium what it is about. It was about that when it was like a small child in a box, right? But it grew up. So if we kind of remove that bias, if we would come to the industry, we've never played video games, we want to make new ones, and we would look around instead of being focused on ourselves, what would we see in that vast space? Well, I think we will see a lot of things around, and they're not just things to be informed of. Of course, those are all products of human condition, thus are products of human culture, like architecture or art or literature or theater or music or sport. And we do get informed by them in games. So if we make a AAA game, we need to build a city, we hire an architect, and it's a common practice. It's great, right? Or if we think that the game will be a strongly narrative-driven game, we hire a writer, and sometimes they win literature awards for those. But this kind of information is one step. We actually can assess games in interactive perspective and understand that they're not should be just informed. They can evolve those medias. They are actually a natural evolution of human interaction, and it is much broader than that bubble. So there are two levels of getting informed and kind of how we can act on that. And one is to really look at leveled up mediums. But not only to get them in our games if we feel like we need it, but to adhere to the same standards they already adhere to, right? Those mediums I just list a few. It's like literature and fine arts and product design and architecture, sports, and the list goes on. But the approach of leveling to them means that, for example, you would expect from the game same level of adherence to standards as you would expect from a published book that is in the library. Right? And not just saying like, of course we understand how plot works, or where the excitement of plot and all the literature tropes we can just import to the game. Instead, you would think that people who just assemble words into sentences and sentences in a structure that is a text, they don't get published in a book. Or if you get a book like that, you wouldn't want your child to read it. You'd be like, this is kind of fast food reading. It's not really helpful for you. But in games, we think that's totally fine for no reason. Another approach, and then I'm going to stop on each of them individually, is to recognize true human needs that games can address as a more superior medium. True needs like instant gratification is not really a human need, or solving puzzle and getting enjoyment of it, if it's a repetitive and repeated hundreds of times, is also far from human needs. Real human needs are more in the line of fear moment, which is provided perfectly by the games, and it also perfectly ties to the education requirements. It's called the zone of proximity development. And this is a level of challenge, it's like a difficulty curve, when a child is still able to learn by itself. It applies to adults as well. So this is a part where it is still fun to learn, and you gain as much knowledge as possible. And after that, it is too hard to learn, and before that, it's not engaging enough. So games, if you look at it, and video games particularly, is a perfect machinery for this, right? So you can see it's like, oh, Medium actually addresses this very well. Another thing is, of course, emotional empowerment, battling depression. Physical entertainment, we don't think of it that much. We think games are on the screen. We don't think that you can promote physical activities or recreation, a healthier lifestyle with video game, even though they can address it perfectly. Same well as social communication and understanding issues that society has sometimes, right? Because interactive medium is also always better than, let's say, just reading about it like a huge book. It's less engaging. So if you look at, before examples, I have to say good news is that both those approaches, one is getting informed by more mature mediums and getting leveled to their standards, and second one is understanding true human needs, are extremely lucrative. Right? I'm going to show you examples of extremely successful games, and this is good news. You don't need to make drugs that is like a poisonous fast food to earn money. You can actually address other human needs and still make money. And we can look at the games, how different successful games address different attributes of those values that we can discover, right? So if you look at the Monument Valley, for example, and I think everyone can list for yourself, like what exactly does it address? What is there? Like, of course, there's fine art. Of course, there is a very big understanding of spatial awareness, of color theory, of architecture. There is a storytelling involved. And I would argue that this is it shows a natural evolution of those mediums. Right? If you look at it as a piece of human culture, it is not just built with awareness of those other previously built mediums of human culture, but it actually builds upon and evolves them. Right? We can look at Flower, and this is a game about empowerment. This is a game that is fantastically strong for depression conquering and just elevating your spirit. And they're also very good in financial sense, right? They perform very well. This is Super Better. This is the game for everyone who suffered depression again, and maybe who are just out of abusive relationship, or they're recovering from an accident. And this is likely just a premium game. You buy it once, there are no ads or anything, but there could be different monetization models. They're doing pretty well. This is another great example, right? We take a medium and we make a very successful game that addresses very real human needs instead of inventing human needs based on exploiting basically the structures of human brain. How can we do it? There are, of course, those examples are successful. They're like icebergs or like some small islands in the sea. But I would like to propose a certain system we can start using for game development and design process. And I think this system should arise from listing down those opportunities and needs we can address, and then making an assessment tool. Something like a non-GMO project, or the user experience design checklist. User experience design checklist is more like how you would execute, what kind of tool you would end up with. And non-GMO project is a very good example of obvious certification for a consumer. So you can still have fast food, of course, and if you really want, you can also still buy drugs on the corner of the street, right? And combine the two if you want to. But at the same time, when you go to the store, you're buying something for your kid, you know exactly, oh, this is organic. You don't really want to know how exactly they made it, or like what kind of fertilizer they used. You just know this is organic. This addresses your human body in a respectful manner. So the left side would be more for a consumer, and the right side would be for us. We can create an open source tool where a lot of people from the industry can participate. We can create a list that we will refine, certain, like in Wikipedia kind of style, and we can assess every new project, be it in a small enclosed capacities of a few corporates, or once you're ready to kind of show your idea to the world, more open. It is very feasible. What could be on the list? Right? I mentioned a lot of things, but what are the most good examples, I think? Well, I think there are lots of simple things that kind of obvious, but we don't see them in majority of games. Like we have those hundreds of games released, and only 1 in 1,000 or 2 actually matches like those bingo cards kind of that I'm trying to offer here. We can look at, for example, teaching users the law of return and consequences of their actions, the way chess do. I don't show this video game here because there are a lot of video games that do that. Somehow chess still does it better, right? It's very surprising. And somehow the onboarding for chess is much less. Like you can learn chess, and it's really exciting. It's also you can play with a human being, you can play with a computer. And you can learn a lot about planning your actions. So this is really helpful for future life. You don't have to be a chess player after that. Or we can teach our players to think outside of the box. We can introduce them a mechanic and tell them, oh, this is the set of rules we're going to teach you, but you're going to learn how to use those rules in all possible ways. And we're going to reward you because you're going to uncover more exciting opportunities with that. So this could be sandbox games, but they don't have to be. Right? The approach that Braid is using is very simple. It's just every game that has a rule system can incorporate that. You just need to reverse the rules a few times, see players' reaction, let them understand it. You can always make an extra step outside. And it's really funny because as an interaction designer, I sometimes participate in workshops where huge corporations would hire a design agency to teach them to do that and apply the same approach to their business processes. I think you can teach that from age of kids, where you can play video games, and you would just be born with that, basically. Once you enter society as an active participant, you would know how to think outside of the box, and you can apply it to anything. Again, with example of Monument Valley, right? We can teach visual composition. We can teach color theory. A lot of things that usually art students learn can be taught. You can teach good style of composition even, or typography through games, subconsciously. Your players will learn them. You'll get a better educated people. They'll be able to produce better presentations and better documents. You can provide qualities of social communication. Talk about social and gender equality, for example, like Journey does. You can take extremely complex social problems and turn them into enjoyable game experience that will teach a whole generation. And finally, sure enough, games have to be fun. It's a recreational activity, and they can be physically fun. They can be extremely energetic, but there shouldn't be a designed masturbation, right? If you compare football to masturbation, they're both just physical activities. There's no narrative, there's no literature component, and somehow we very clearly understand that one is more beneficial than another. So this is my advice for you. Start filling that list. I will also try to, I guess, initiate an open source website or a platform to do that. But I would like you to each participate in that. There are lots of entry points to this. You can be a designer, you can be a product manager, you can be an investor, and every time you think of a new game project, you can start thinking of that list. And the benefits in the future that will happen when more companies adhere to that list, and like those who did not will stay in that vacuum like Nokia did in 2009. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to say you've given a very fresh point of view on things, but have you thought of it from the consumer's point of view?
From what point, sorry?
From the consumers, from the gamer's point of view. Because there'll always be a tendency among people to go for whatever's easier to approach, even if it's not refined or of high quality. Have you thought of ways to approach that?
Yeah, sure. I think about it a lot, and I'm a gamer myself. I basically grew up with games like Duke Nukem and Blood, and they were really enjoyable, right? Same way McDonald's is enjoyable at a certain point, and drugs can also be enjoyable. They can still be bad for you, right? If you look at the formed gamers consumer market that expects same, but like maybe with more explosions or more weapons, of course there's a big thing to tackle, right? There is a certain expectations for certain category of games, or like for each genre. There is expectations from hardcore audience or for just gamers familiar with that. And those are the people who bring the dollars in, right? Most of them, because we're trying to get new people into the audience, but of course there's a form audience as well. And this is exactly why we should start this from this point, from the creator's point, and not from outside, right? If you only show porn movies in theaters and no one else sees anything else, they'll think that's fine. It's, you know, theaters for porn movies, so let's keep watching them. While if you, as a director, suddenly like, oh, I can tell better stories with this, or I can be more compelling and address different things. And if everyone starts to do that, then you'll see your consumers also start to gravitate towards different choices. It's like if you don't label food with GMO or organic, sure enough, people still eat food. If you replace all the food with fast food, they will still eat it, right? And they'll die younger out of heart diseases and blood problems. But it is really very much on the manufacturer's responsibility, because we are the creators of content. So it is not about really censorship. It is about understanding the needs. Right now, you can self-publish a book, you can get published by a book publisher, and you can write about anything you want. But there is an awareness in the society. As a society, we evolved to appreciate a certain level of the text. Something that you would think, oh, if my kid reads this, which is just literature and not any particular book, you would think, oh, he gains better command of the language it's written in, and he'll broaden his horizon. There is no expectations like that from video games right now. We can expect a certain length of play, maybe like, oh, this is 50 hours, so it costs $50, okay, and that's it. Or maybe some graphics standards for some audience. And this has to be enforced from inside. We have to be aware that we still can sell great games if we adhere to human condition, if we start making it into a valuable product for society. So that's what I think. I think, yes, the audience that is already formed is hard to deal with. That's why we should start from inside. We wouldn't get a very strong response from outside, because there's very little games that show the different approach. Most people that try video games and they don't like it, they just don't come back, right? If you try Flower, you come back, and if you try a shooter and suddenly you're not a shooter type, you don't like violence and fear a moment repeated constantly, but nothing else, you just don't go back, and then your voice is not heard in the consumer mind. We don't count your dollar anymore because you didn't buy previous game. That's it.